Maria Santos had been cleaning offices at Peterson Manufacturing for 3 years. Invisible to most employees who hurried past her with their important documents and urgent phone calls. At 42, she moved quietly through the corridors with her cart of supplies, emptying trash bins and wiping down desks while the engineers and executives planned their next big projects. Her English carried a soft accent from her childhood in Guatemala, and she preferred to keep conversations brief and polite. The massive factory floor always fascinated her during her evening shifts. Enormous machines hummed and roared, shaping metal into parts that would become cars, trucks, and motorcycles. She had watched the mechanics work on these machines countless times, observing how they diagnosed problems, replaced parts, and brought the mechanical giants back to life. Her father had been a mechanic back home, and she had spent countless hours in his small garage, handing him tools and learning to recognize the sounds that different engines made when they were healthy or sick. But nobody at Peterson Manufacturing knew about her background. To them, she was simply Maria, the quiet cleaning lady who arrived at 6 each evening and left before dawn. Everything changed on a particularly stressful Tuesday when the company's most important client, Morrison Motors, was scheduled to visit. The centerpiece of their tour would be the demonstration of Peterson's newest prototype engine, a revolutionary design that promised to reduce emissions by 30% while increasing fuel efficiency. The engine represented 2 years of development and millions of dollars in research. James Peterson, the company owner and grandson of the founder, paced nervously around the factory floor. At 38, he had inherited both the business and the pressure to keep it competitive in an increasingly challenging market. Morrison Motors represented their biggest potential contract, worth over $50 million. Everything had to be perfect for tomorrow's demonstration. "Sir, we have a problem," announced Tom Bradley, the head mechanic, his face grim as he approached Peterson. Tom had worked at the company for 15 years and had never seen an engine problem he couldn't solve. His reputation for fixing the impossible had made him invaluable to the company. Peterson's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "The prototype engine. It was running fine yesterday, but this morning it started making a strange noise. We've been working on it all day, but we can't figure out what's wrong. The diagnostic computers aren't picking up anything definitive." They walked over to the engine, which sat on a specialized testing platform surrounded by computers and monitoring equipment. Several mechanics stood around it, their faces showing frustration and exhaustion. The engine looked perfect from the outside, its polished surfaces gleaming under the factory lights, but when they started it up, an unusual knocking sound emerged from deep within its core. "Show me what you've tried," Peterson said, rolling up his sleeves. Tom launched into a detailed explanation. They had checked the oil pressure, examined the fuel injection system, tested the ignition timing, and even disassembled parts of the engine to look for obvious problems. Every component appeared to be in perfect condition, yet the knocking persisted. The sound was subtle but definitely there, and it would be impossible to demonstrate the engine to Morrison Motors with that kind of noise. "Maybe it's the pistons," suggested one mechanic. "We already checked those," Tom replied. "Compression is perfect on all cylinders." "Could be the crankshaft bearings," offered another. "Check those too. No wear, no play, everything's within specifications." Peterson felt sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool factory air. The Morrison Motors delegation would arrive at 10 in the morning, and they had less than 16 hours to solve a problem that had stumped his best mechanics all day. Canceling the demonstration wasn't an option. Morrison had already postponed, twice due to scheduling conflicts, and Peterson knew they were also considering proposals from competitors. "What if we swap in the backup engine?" Peterson asked desperately. Tom shook his head. "The backup isn't calibrated for the emission tests. It would take at least a week to get it properly tuned and certified." As Peterson stared at the problematic engine, he noticed Maria working quietly in the corner of the factory, emptying trash cans near the testing area. She moved with her usual efficiency, but he caught her glancing occasionally at the engine and the frustrated group of mechanics. Most employees barely acknowledged the cleaning staff, but Peterson prided himself on knowing everyone who worked for him. "This is impossible," muttered one of the younger mechanics. "We've checked everything twice." Peterson's frustration boiled over. The stress of the impending demonstration, combined with the day's failures, pushed him to his breaking point. In a moment he would later regret, he gestured toward Maria and said loudly, "At this point, I'd be willing to let anyone try to fix this thing. Hell, even Maria here probably has as good a chance as we do." The comment was meant as a bitter joke, a way to express his desperation rather than a serious suggestion. The mechanics chuckled nervously, unsure how to respond to their boss's unusual outburst. Peterson immediately felt embarrassed by his unprofessional behavior. Maria paused in her work, her dark eyes meeting Peterson's across the factory floor. For a moment, the bustling noise of the factory seemed to fade away. She had been listening to the engine's rhythm for the past hour, and something about the sound pattern reminded her of a problem her father had encountered years ago in their small garage in Guatemala. "I'm sorry, Maria," Peterson said quickly, realizing how inappropriate his comment had been. "I didn't mean to." "Mr. Peterson," Maria interrupted softly, her voice barely audible over the factory noise. "May I listen to the engine?" The mechanics stopped their conversations and turned to look at her. Tom Bradley raised his eyebrows in surprise. In all his years at the company, he had never heard Maria speak up about anything related to the machinery. Peterson felt caught between embarrassment and curiosity. His comment had been thoughtless, but Maria's request seemed genuine rather than offended. Something in her quiet confidence made him hesitate before dismissing the idea entirely. "You want to listen to the engine?" he asked. Maria nodded, setting down her cleaning supplies. Sometimes the ear can hear what the machines cannot measure. The factory fell unusually quiet as everyone processed this unexpected turn of events. The cleaning lady wanted to diagnose an engine that had stumped the company's best mechanics. It seemed absurd, yet Peterson found himself oddly curious about what she might have to say. Peterson looked around at his mechanics, seeing a mixture of skepticism and curiosity on their faces. Tom Bradley crossed his arms and shook his head slightly, clearly thinking this was a waste of precious time. The other mechanics exchanged glances, unsure whether their boss was being serious or if this was some kind of test. "Maria," Peterson said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but this is a very complex engine. We have diagnostic equipment that costs more than most people's houses, and our mechanics have decades of experience." Maria nodded respectfully. "Yes, Mr. Peterson, I understand, but my father, he always said that engines have their own language. Sometimes they tell you things that no machine can translate." Something in her tone made Peterson pause. There was no arrogance or false confidence, just quiet certainty. He glanced at his watch. It was already past 8 in the evening, and they had made no progress in over 10 hours. What did they have to lose? "All right," he said finally. "Tom, start it up and let Maria listen." Tom's expression showed he thought his boss had lost his mind, but he followed orders. He pressed the ignition button, and the prototype engine roared to life. The sound was impressive, a deep, powerful rumble that spoke of precision engineering and careful craftsmanship. But underneath that strong rhythm was the subtle knocking that had been driving everyone crazy all day. Maria approached the engine slowly, her head tilted slightly as she focused on the sounds. She ignored the suspicious looks from the mechanics and the elaborate monitoring equipment surrounding the machine. Instead, she moved around the engine like a doctor examining a patient, pausing at different points to listen more carefully. The knocking was irregular, not following any predictable pattern that the computer systems could analyze. It would appear for a few seconds, disappear, then return with slightly different timing. Maria closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, separating the various mechanical voices within the engine's symphony. "Can you tell us what you hear?" Peterson asked after several minutes. Maria held up her hand gently, asking for more time. She walked to the front of the engine, then to the back, comparing the sounds from different angles. Her father had taught her that engine problems often revealed themselves through subtle changes in sound that occurred at specific locations around the motor. "The knocking," she said finally, opening her eyes. "It is not from the pistons or the crankshaft." Tom snorted. "Those were the first things we checked. Of course it's not the pistons or crankshaft." Maria looked at him without defensiveness. The sound is too high-pitched for the crankshaft and too irregular for the pistons. It sounds like metal touching metal, but not under heavy load. One of the younger mechanics, David, stepped forward. We checked all the clearances. Everything is within specifications. May I ask you to increase the engine speed? Maria requested. Tom looked at Peterson, who nodded. Tom gradually increased the throttle, bringing the engine from idle up to higher RPMs. As the speed increased, the mysterious knocking became more frequent, but not necessarily louder. Maria listened intently, her eyes closed again. Now please, bring it back to idle, but very slowly. As the engine speed decreased, Maria moved closer to the left side of the motor. The knocking continued its irregular pattern, but she noticed something that the sophisticated diagnostic equipment had missed. The sound seemed slightly different when the engine was transitioning between different speeds. Mr. Peterson, she said quietly, I think the problem might be in the timing chain area. The mechanics looked at each other with surprise. The timing chain was deep inside the engine, and accessing it would require significant disassembly. It wasn't something they could check quickly, which is why they had focused on more accessible components first. The timing chain? Tom asked. The tension is automatically controlled by a hydraulic system. Those systems rarely fail, especially on a new engine. Maria nodded. Yes, but sometimes the tensioner can stick in one position, even if the hydraulics are working. My father had a car once, a Ford from the 1990s, that made a similar sound. Everyone thought it was the pistons, but it was the timing chain tensioner that was sticking. Peterson felt a spark of hope mixed with skepticism. But this is a completely different engine design. It's not even comparable to a 1990s Ford. The principle is the same, Maria said gently. When the tensioner sticks, the chain has just a little bit too much slack. Not enough to affect the timing significantly, but enough to let the chain tap against the guides irregularly. The sound comes and goes because the chain only hits the guides when the engine vibration is just right. David, the youngest mechanic, looked thoughtful. That would explain why the diagnostic computers can't find anything. The timing is still within acceptable parameters, just not perfect. Tom remained skeptical. Even if that were the case, we'd need to remove the front cover, the harmonic balancer, and half the accessory drives just to look at the timing chain. That's at least 6 hours of work, assuming we don't run into any problems. Peterson checked his watch again. It was nearly 9 o'clock. We don't have 6 hours. Morrison Motors will be here in 13 hours. Maria had been listening to this exchange quietly, and now she spoke up again. Mr. Peterson, there might be a way to test this without taking the engine apart. Everyone turned to look at her. Tom's expression showed he was running out of patience with what he clearly considered amateur diagnosis from someone with no formal training. How? Peterson asked. The timing chain tensioners on modern engines are usually controlled by oil pressure, Maria explained. If the tensioner is sticking, sometimes you can free it by changing the oil pressure temporarily. Tom shook his head. That's not how these systems work. The oil pressure is regulated automatically. Yes, Maria agreed, but sometimes you can cycle the pressure by revving the engine in a specific way, or by briefly disconnecting and reconnecting the oil pressure line to the tensioner. Peterson looked around at his mechanics. They had tried everything else and nothing had worked. Morrison Motors represented the future of his company, and he was running out of options and time. Tom, he said finally, do we have anything to lose by trying Maria's suggestion? Tom wanted to argue, but he looked at the engine that had defeated him and his team all day. His professional pride was hurt, but his loyalty to the company was stronger. It won't hurt anything to try, he admitted, reluctantly, but I don't think it's going to work. Tom Bradley gathered his tools with obvious reluctance, still convinced they were wasting valuable time on a wild theory from someone who cleaned offices for a living. The other mechanics watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as he prepared to test Maria's suggestion about the timing chain tensioner. All right, Maria, Tom said, his voice showing strained patience. Walk me through exactly what you think we should do. Maria approached the engine thoughtfully, pointing to various components as she explained her reasoning. The timing chain tensioner receives oil pressure through this line here, she said, indicating a small hydraulic hose. If the internal mechanism is stuck, sometimes cycling the pressure can free it up. Peterson watched this exchange with fascination. Maria's knowledge of engine components was clearly more extensive than anyone had imagined. She spoke with quiet confidence about hydraulic systems and timing mechanisms, using technical terms correctly, and demonstrating an understanding that went far beyond casual observation. First, Maria continued, we should try the simple approach. Rev the engine to about 3,000 RPM and hold it there for 30 seconds, then let it return to idle quickly. Sometimes the pressure change is enough to unstick a tensioner. David, the young mechanic, looked intrigued. That makes sense. The oil pump would create higher pressure at higher RPMs, and the sudden pressure drop might shock the tensioner into moving. Tom remained unconvinced but followed Maria's instructions. He brought the engine up to 3,000 RPM and held it steady. The knocking sound became more pronounced at the higher speed, a rapid tapping that made everyone wince. After 30 seconds, he released the throttle and let the engine drop back to idle. They all listened intently as the engine settled back to its normal idle speed. For a moment, the knocking seemed to fade, and Peterson felt his heart jump with hope. But then the irregular tapping returned, just as mysterious and frustrating as before. No change, Tom announced, unable to hide the satisfaction in his voice. The problem is still there. Maria nodded calmly, seemingly unaffected by the failure of her first suggestion. That was just the first test. Now we try the more direct approach. She pointed to the oil line leading to the timing chain tensioner. We need to carefully disconnect this line while the engine is running at idle, then reconnect it. The pressure drop and restoration might be enough to free the stuck mechanism. Tom's expression showed alarm. Disconnect an oil line while the engine is running? That's going to make a mess, and it could be dangerous. Only for a few seconds, Maria explained. Just long enough to cycle the pressure. We can catch the oil in a container. Peterson looked around at the spotless factory floor and the expensive equipment surrounding the engine test stand. Oil cleanup would be the least of his problems if they couldn't fix the engine before morning. Do it, he decided. We need to try everything. Tom gathered a collection pan and some rags, muttering under his breath about amateur mechanics and desperate measures. He positioned the pan under the hydraulic line and carefully loosened the connection while the engine idled. Oil immediately began flowing into the container, and Tom quickly retightened the fitting. There, he said, wiping his hands. The pressure has been cycled. Now what? Now we listen, Maria said simply. They all focused on the engine's sound as it continued to idle. For the first few seconds, nothing seemed different. The same irregular knocking persisted, mocking their efforts. But then gradually something began to change. The knocking became less frequent, then less pronounced. Peterson held his breath, afraid that hoping too much might somehow jinx their progress. The other mechanics leaned forward, straining to hear every nuance of the engine's voice. Is it just me, or is the sound getting quieter? David whispered. They listened for another minute, and the improvement became undeniable. The mysterious knocking was definitely fading. It didn't disappear completely, but it was significantly reduced. Increase the RPMs, Maria suggested. Let's see if the improvement holds at higher speeds. Tom brought the engine up to 2,000 RPM, then 3,000, then 4,000. At each speed, the knocking was noticeably quieter than it had been before. It was still there, but much less pronounced. It's better, Peterson said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. But it's not completely gone. Maria nodded. Sometimes the tensioner needs more help. The mechanism might be partially freed, but not completely. We might need to repeat the process. Tom looked at the engine with new respect. Maria's diagnosis had produced the first improvement they had seen all day. His skepticism was beginning to crack. What do you suggest we try next? He asked, his tone much more respectful than before. Let's try a combination approach, Maria replied. Disconnect the oil line again, but this time while the engine is at higher RPMs. The greater pressure differential might provide more shock to the system. This was a more complex and potentially dangerous procedure. Higher engine speeds meant higher oil pressure and more oil flow. Tom would need to work quickly to minimize the mess and potential safety hazards. Peterson looked at his watch. It was now past 10 o'clock at night. Morrison Motors would arrive in less than 12 hours, and they had finally made some progress. The improvement wasn't complete, but it was definitely real. "Tom," he said, "what do you think? Are you comfortable trying Maria's suggestion?" Tom studied the engine setup and considered the risks. Working around pressurized oil lines while an engine was running wasn't standard procedure, but these weren't standard circumstances. The potential $50 million contract with Morrison Motors justified taking some calculated risks. "I can do it safely," he decided, "but I want everyone except Maria and Mr. Peterson to step back. If something goes wrong, I don't want anyone getting splashed with hot oil." The other mechanics moved to a safe distance while Tom prepared for the more aggressive pressure cycling. He positioned larger collection pans and had extra rags ready. Maria stood nearby, ready to call out instructions based on what she heard from the engine. "Bring it up to 3,000 RPM, Maria directed. Tom increased the throttle and let the engine stabilize at the higher speed. The oil pump was now working much harder, creating significantly more pressure in the hydraulic line to the timing chain tensioner. "Now disconnect the line," Maria said. Tom quickly loosened the fitting, and oil sprayed out under much higher pressure than before. He caught most of it in his collection pan, but some splashed onto the floor despite his preparations. "Hold it for 5 seconds, Maria counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now reconnect it quickly." Tom tightened the fitting as fast as he could, while Maria listened intently to the engine's response. As the oil pressure was restored to the timing chain tensioner, they all heard a subtle change in the engine's rhythm. "Reduce to idle," Maria instructed. As Tom brought the engine's speed back down, the change became more apparent. The knocking sound was dramatically reduced, almost completely eliminated. Peterson felt a surge of excitement that he tried to keep under control. The factory floor fell silent except for the smooth, steady rumble of the prototype engine. The mysterious knocking that had plagued them all day was virtually gone, replaced by the clean, powerful sound they had expected from their revolutionary design. Peterson stared at the engine in disbelief, then looked at Maria, who was calmly wiping her hands on a shop rag. "Run it through the full test cycle," Peterson said, his voice barely containing his excitement. Tom, still processing what had just happened, began the standard diagnostic routine. He increased the engine speed gradually, taking it through the same RPM ranges that had revealed the knocking problem earlier. At 1,500 RPM, the engine was smooth. At 2,500 RPM, still smooth. At 4,000 RPM, the engine produced the powerful, clean sound they had spent 2 years developing. "I can't believe it," David whispered. "The knocking is completely gone." Peterson felt a wave of relief wash over him that was so intense it made his knees weak. The Morrison Motors demonstration could proceed as planned. The $50 million contract was back within reach. But more than that, he was witnessing something that challenged everything he thought he knew about his own company. "Maria," he said, turning to face the woman who had just saved his business. "How did you know to try that?" Maria set down the rag and looked at him with the same quiet dignity she had always shown. "My father taught me to listen to engines when I was young. In Guatemala, we could not afford fancy diagnostic equipment, so we learned to hear what the machines were trying to tell us." Tom Bradley, the head mechanic who had initially dismissed Maria's suggestions, stepped forward. His face showed a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. "Maria, I owe you an apology. I've been working on engines for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone diagnose a problem like that just by listening." "Different experiences teach different skills," Maria replied graciously. "Your knowledge of modern systems is far greater than mine. I just happened to recognize a sound my father showed me many years ago." Peterson realized that several other employees had gathered around during the engine testing, drawn by the unusual sight of their boss taking advice from the cleaning lady. Word was already spreading through the night shift about what had happened. By morning, everyone in the company would know that Maria Santos had solved the problem that stumped the engineering department. "Maria," Peterson said, "I need to ask." You something and please be honest with me. What else do you know about engines and mechanical systems? Maria considered the question carefully. My father owned a small garage in Guatemala City. I worked there with him from the time I was 8 years old until I came to America 15 years ago. I have experience with many different types of engines, cars, trucks, motorcycles, some industrial equipment. But everything I learned was practical, hands-on experience. I have no formal training or certifications. Peterson felt his mind racing with possibilities. Why didn't you ever mention this? We've had mechanical problems before where your input could have been valuable. You never asked, Maria said simply. And I am here to clean offices, not to work on engines. I did not want to overstep my position. The simplicity and honesty of her answer made Peterson feel ashamed of how little attention he had paid to the people who worked for him every day. Maria had been walking through his factory for 3 years, observing his machines, listening to their sounds, and he had never once considered that she might have valuable insights to offer. Tom, Peterson said, I want you to run the complete diagnostic suite on this engine. I want confirmation that everything is working within specifications before the Morrison demonstration tomorrow. As Tom began setting up the computerized diagnostic equipment, Peterson pulled Maria aside for a private conversation. He was still processing the implications of what had just happened, both for the immediate crisis and for the longer-term future of his company. Maria, I have a proposition for you, he said. Obviously, your mechanical knowledge is far more extensive than any of us realized. I'd like to offer you a position in our maintenance department. Maria looked surprised. Mr. Peterson, I appreciate the offer, but I am not qualified for such a position. I have no formal training, no certifications, no engineering degree. You just solved a problem that our entire engineering team couldn't figure out, Peterson pointed out. Sometimes practical experience is more valuable than formal qualifications. But the other mechanics have worked very hard to earn their positions, Maria said. It would not be fair to them if I simply stepped into their department without proper credentials. Peterson nodded, appreciating her concern for workplace fairness. What if we started you as an assistant mechanic? You could work with Tom and the others, learning our specific systems while contributing your diagnostic skills. We could arrange for you to get the formal certifications you need. Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. May, I think about this. It is a big change, and I want to be sure I can do the job well. Of course, Peterson said. Take all the time you need, but I hope you'll seriously consider it. We need people who can think differently about problems. Meanwhile, Tom had completed the initial diagnostic tests, and his expression showed amazement. Mr. Peterson, you need to see this. All the engine parameters are not just within specifications, they're perfect. Better than perfect, actually. The timing chain tension is now exactly where it should be. Peterson walked over to review the diagnostic readouts. The computer screens showed a series of green lights and optimal readings across all systems. The engine was performing exactly as designed, ready to impress the Morrison Motors delegation in the morning. How long would it have taken us to find this problem using conventional diagnostic methods? Peterson asked. Tom considered the question. Honestly, we might never have found it. The timing chain tension was within acceptable parameters according to our diagnostic equipment. We would have kept looking at other systems until we either got lucky or gave up. We certainly wouldn't have found it before the Morrison demonstration. Peterson looked around at his factory with new eyes. How many other problems could be solved by people who brought different perspectives and experiences? How much knowledge was walking through his facility every day that he had never bothered to tap into? Tom, I want you to schedule some time with Maria over the next few weeks. I'd like her to listen to all our major production engines and tell us if she hears anything unusual. Consider it a comprehensive diagnostic review. That's actually a great idea, Tom admitted. Our diagnostic equipment is sophisticated, but it can only detect problems that it's programmed to recognize. Having someone listen with trained ears might catch things we're missing. As the night crew began to wind down their shifts, Peterson realized he felt more optimistic about his company's future than he had in months. The Morrison Motors demonstration would proceed as planned, but more importantly, He had learned something valuable about recognizing and utilizing the talents of all his employees. Maria had quietly returned to her cleaning duties, emptying trash, cans, and wiping down workstations as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everything had changed, and Peterson knew that tomorrow would bring new possibilities for both Maria and Peterson Manufacturing. The next morning arrived with crisp autumn air and perfect weather for the most important business presentation of Peterson's career. He had barely slept, his mind racing between excitement about the fixed engine and thoughts about Maria's unexpected revelation. By 7 a.m., he was already in the factory, double-checking every detail of the demonstration setup. The Morrison Motors delegation was scheduled to arrive at 10 o'clock sharp. Peterson knew that Robert Morrison, the company's CEO, was a man who valued punctuality and precision above all else. This demonstration needed to be flawless. Tom Bradley and his team had arrived early to run one final test of the prototype engine. The factory floor buzzed with nervous energy as everyone prepared for the visit that could determine the future of Peterson Manufacturing. The $50 million contract with Morrison Motors represented more than just revenue. It would establish their company as a major player in the next generation of automotive technology. How does it sound? Peterson asked as Tom started the engine for their pre-demonstration test. Tom listened carefully to the smooth, powerful rumble. Perfect. Whatever Maria did last night, it completely solved the problem. I've never heard this engine run better. Peterson nodded with satisfaction, but he also felt a nagging concern about giving Maria proper credit for saving the demonstration. She had asked for time to consider his job offer, but he hadn't figured out how to acknowledge her contribution without potentially embarrassing his engineering team in front of the Morrison delegation. At 9:45 a.m., Peterson positioned himself in the lobby to greet their visitors. He wore his best suit and had rehearsed his presentation multiple times. The factory had been cleaned and organized to showcase their capabilities. Everything was ready. Robert Morrison arrived precisely on time with 3 members of his technical team. Morrison was a distinguished man in his early 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His reputation for demanding excellence was legendary in the automotive industry. "James, good to see you again," Morrison said as they shook hands. "I'm looking forward to seeing what you've developed. Your proposal was impressive on paper, but we need to see real-world performance." Peterson led the group through the facility, explaining their manufacturing processes and quality control measures. Morrison's technical team asked detailed questions about production capacity, supply chain management, and long-term reliability testing. Peterson answered confidently, knowing his company's strengths. Finally, they arrived at the factory floor where the prototype engine waited on its test stand. The machine looked magnificent under the bright factory lights, representing 2 years of intensive research and development. "Gentlemen, this is our revolutionary new engine design," Peterson announced. "It reduces emissions by 30%, while increasing fuel efficiency by 25% compared to current industry standards." Morrison's lead engineer, Dr. Sarah Chen, examined the engine closely. "The specifications in your proposal were impressive. Let's see how it performs in reality." Peterson gave Tom a slight nod and Tom pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life with a deep, satisfying rumble that filled the factory floor. The sound was everything they had hoped for: powerful, smooth, and precisely controlled. "Excellent. Startup," Dr. Chen observed, making notes on her tablet. "Let's see how it handles load variations." Tom began putting the engine through its paces, demonstrating different RPM levels and load conditions. The engine responded flawlessly to every test, producing the clean emissions and efficient fuel consumption that Peterson had promised. Morrison and his team watched with obvious interest as the diagnostic displays showed performance numbers that exceeded their expectations. "The noise levels are remarkably low," Morrison commented. "How did you achieve such quiet operation without sacrificing power?" Peterson launched into a detailed explanation of their innovative design features, but as he spoke, he found his thoughts drifting to Maria. Without her intervention, this demonstration would have been a disaster. The Morrison delegation would have heard that mysterious knocking and immediately questioned the engine's reliability. The timing chain system is particularly sophisticated, Dr. Chen noted, pointing to the front of the engine. Proper timing chain tension is crucial for long-term reliability. Any fluctuations can cause noise and performance issues. Peterson felt a chill run down his spine. Dr. Chen was unknowingly describing exactly the problem that had almost ruined everything. If Maria hadn't diagnosed the stuck tensioner, they would be explaining away a mysterious knocking sound instead of celebrating perfect performance. The demonstration continued for another hour, with the Morrison team putting the engine through increasingly demanding tests. Every parameter remained within optimal ranges, and the engine's performance was everything Peterson had promised. "James, this is impressive work," Morrison said finally. "The performance numbers are exactly what we need for our next generation of vehicles. I'm prepared to move forward with contract negotiations." Peterson felt a surge of triumph, but it was mixed with an uncomfortable awareness that he was accepting praise for a success that belonged as much to Maria as to his engineering team. Morrison's words could transform his company's future, but that future had been secured by a cleaning lady whom Morrison would never meet. As the delegation prepared to leave, Dr. Chen asked one final question. "The engine's timing characteristics are exceptionally precise. What diagnostic methods do you use to ensure such accurate timing chain tension during assembly?" Peterson hesitated for a moment, realizing this was an opportunity to tell the complete truth about their problem-solving process. But with millions of dollars at stake, he chose the safe response. "We use a combination of computerized diagnostic equipment and experienced technicians who can detect issues that automated systems might miss," he said. It wasn't technically a lie, but Peterson knew he was omitting the most important part of the story. After the Morrison delegation departed, promising to send a contract proposal within the week, Peterson gathered his team to celebrate. The presentation had been a complete success, and everyone was excited about the future opportunities it would create. But as the celebration continued, Peterson found himself thinking about Maria. She was scheduled to work her regular evening shift, and he hadn't yet figured out how to properly acknowledge what she had done. Tom Bradley approached him during the celebration. "Mr. Peterson, I've been thinking about what happened last night. Maria saved this entire demonstration and probably saved the company. Shouldn't she be part of this celebration?" Peterson nodded. "You're absolutely right. I've been thinking the same thing." "What are you going to do about it?" Tom asked. Peterson looked around at his celebrating employees, then made a decision. That would change everything for Maria Santos. "I'm going to make sure she gets the recognition she deserves," he said. "And I'm going to make sure our company never again overlooks the talents of people just because of their job titles." That evening, when Maria arrived for her regular shift, Peterson was waiting for her in the factory lobby. He had spent the afternoon thinking about how to approach this conversation, knowing that it would affect not just Maria's future, but the entire culture of his company. "Maria, do you have a few minutes to talk?" he asked. She nodded, setting down her cleaning cart. "Yes, Mr. Peterson. Have you heard about the demonstration today?" "It was a complete success," Peterson said. "Morrison Motors is moving forward with the contract. But Maria, that success belongs to you as much as anyone else in this company." Maria looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I only listened to an engine, Mr. Peterson. Your team built something amazing." "You did much more than listen," Peterson insisted. "You solved a problem that could have cost us everything. Tom told me that without your diagnosis we might never have found that timing chain issue." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Maria, I made a mistake yesterday when I joked about letting anyone try to fix the engine. But you turned my thoughtless comment into an opportunity to help. That tells me something important about your character." Maria waited patiently for him to continue, her dark eyes reflecting the factory lights. "I want to offer you something more substantial than just a position in the maintenance department," Peterson said. "I want to create a new role for you, a diagnostic specialist who works with all our departments to identify problems that our standard procedures might miss." Maria's eyes widened with surprise. Mr. Peterson, I am honored, but I still do not have the formal qualifications. Experience and insight matter more than certificates, Peterson interrupted. We'll get you the certifications you need, but your ability to hear what others miss, that's something that can't be taught in school. Peterson had been thinking about this all day, and he had come to realize that Maria represented something his company desperately needed. A different perspective, fresh eyes and ears that could catch problems before they became crises. Position would come with a significant salary increase, Peterson continued, and full benefits including educational support for any technical training you want to pursue. Maria was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. What would the other employees think? I do not want to cause resentment. Tom Bradley suggested this role himself, Peterson assured her. He said having someone with your diagnostic skills working with the entire engineering team could prevent a lot of problems. He's excited about the possibility of collaborating with you. The factory was quiet around them, the massive machines idle until the next day's production run. Peterson realized this was exactly where the conversation should be taking place. Surrounded by the engines and equipment that had brought them together, Mr. Peterson, Maria said finally, if I accept this position, I want to earn it properly. I do not want special treatment because of what happened yesterday. You won't get special treatment, Peterson promised. You'll get the same opportunities as everyone else to prove yourself. But Maria, you've already proven you can solve problems that stump our best people. I'd be foolish not to recognize that talent. Maria smiled for the first time in their conversation. Then yes, I would like to accept your offer. Peterson felt a wave of satisfaction that rivaled what he had experienced during the successful Morrison demonstration. Excellent. We'll start the transition next week. Tom will help you learn our specific systems, and we'll get you enrolled in some technical certification programs. As they shook hands on the agreement, Peterson realized that the previous day's crisis had taught him something valuable about leadership. The best solutions sometimes came from unexpected sources, and the wisest leaders were those who remained open to insights from every member of their team. 6 months later, Peterson Manufacturing had transformed in ways that James Peterson never could have imagined when he first challenged Maria to listen to that problematic engine. The Morrison Motors contract had been signed and was already generating substantial revenue, but the changes within the company ran much deeper than any single business deal. Maria Santos had become one of the most valued members of the engineering team, though her journey to acceptance hadn't been without challenges. Some employees had initially questioned whether she truly deserved her new position, wondering if she had simply gotten lucky with one correct diagnosis. Those doubts had quickly disappeared as Maria demonstrated her abilities across a wide range of mechanical systems. Her first major success in her new role came just 3 weeks after starting in the diagnostic specialist position. The company's main production line had been experiencing intermittent slowdowns that the automated monitoring systems couldn't explain. The efficiency losses were costing thousands of dollars per day, but the problems were so sporadic that traditional diagnostic methods had failed to identify the cause. Maria spent an entire day walking the production line, listening to the various machines during different phases of operation. While the engineers focused on computer data and mechanical measurements, she paid attention to subtle changes in sound patterns that indicated machinery operating under stress. The third stamping press has a bearing that's beginning to fail, she announced after her investigation. It's not failing fast enough to trigger the temperature sensors, but the sound signature shows irregular friction patterns. Tom Bradley, who had become Maria's strongest supporter and mentor, arranged for the bearing to be inspected during the next scheduled maintenance window. They found it was indeed showing early signs of wear that would have led to a complete failure within weeks. Replacing it during planned maintenance cost a few $1,000s. Waiting for it to fail would have shut down the entire production line and cost hundreds of thousands. Word of Maria's success spread quickly through the company. Employees who had initially been skeptical began seeking her input on mechanical problems in their own departments. Maria approached each request with the same quiet confidence and careful attention that had characterized her engine diagnosis on that crucial night. But the changes at Peterson Manufacturing extended beyond Maria's individual contributions. James Peterson had realized that the crisis with the Morrison demonstration had revealed a fundamental flaw in his company's culture. How many other talented employees had been overlooked because their job titles didn't match their capabilities? Peterson instituted a monthly innovation forum where any employee could present ideas for improving operations, regardless of their department or position. The forums had already generated dozens of valuable suggestions, from a forklift driver who redesigned the warehouse layout to improve efficiency, to a secretary who developed a better system for tracking customer communications. The company also established a formal mentorship program that paired experienced engineers with employees from other departments who showed interest and aptitude for technical work. 3 maintenance workers and 2 office staff members were now pursuing engineering certifications with company support. Maria had become one of the most active mentors in the program, working with employees who wanted to develop diagnostic skills. She had discovered that teaching others actually enhanced her own abilities, forcing her to articulate the intuitive knowledge she had gained from years of hands-on experience. The key is learning to separate the different sounds an engine makes, she explained to a group of maintenance trainees during one of her weekly sessions. Every component has its own voice. When you understand what each part should sound like, you can immediately hear when something is wrong. Her teaching methods were practical and accessible, focused on real-world application rather than theoretical knowledge. The trainees learned by listening to actual engines, developing their ear for mechanical problems under Maria's patient guidance. Dr. Sarah Chen from Morrison Motors had become aware of Maria's story during one of her follow-up visits to monitor the engine contract. She was so impressed by Peterson Manufacturing's approach to employee development that Morrison Motors had begun implementing similar programs in their own facilities. "You've created something special here," Dr. Chen told Peterson during her most recent visit. "The way you've integrated practical experience with formal technical training is exactly what the industry needs. We're seeing innovation and problem-solving capabilities that our traditional engineering programs don't always develop." Peterson felt proud of what his company had accomplished, but he also remained humble about how the transformation had begun. Without Maria's courage to speak up during that desperate moment, none of these positive changes would have occurred. The Morrison contract had led to additional opportunities with other automotive manufacturers who had heard about Peterson Manufacturing's innovative approach to problem-solving. The company was now designing engines for 3 major automakers, and Peterson was considering expanding their facility to meet growing demand. But the success that meant the most to Peterson was what had happened to Maria personally. She had enrolled in an engineering certification program at the local community college, attending classes in the evenings while working her new position during the day. Her instructors were amazed by her practical knowledge and her ability to explain complex concepts in simple terms. Maria had also become something of a celebrity within the broader manufacturing community. Trade publications had written articles about her story, and she had been invited to speak at conferences about the value of practical experience in technical fields. She approached these opportunities with the same thoughtful dignity that had characterized her work at Peterson Manufacturing. "People ask me if I feel like my life changed overnight," Maria said during one such conference presentation. "But the truth is, I had these skills for years. What changed was that someone finally gave me the opportunity to use them." Her story had inspired other companies to take a closer look at the untapped talents within their own organizations. Several major manufacturers had begun programs specifically designed to identify and develop employees whose capabilities extended beyond their current job descriptions. Peterson often reflected on the lesson that Maria's success had taught him about leadership and human potential. The most valuable resources in any organization weren't necessarily the ones listed on organizational charts or reflected in formal job descriptions. Sometimes the solution to impossible problems could be found in the quiet wisdom of someone who had been overlooked, simply because no one had thought to ask for their input. On the anniversary of the Morrison demonstration, Peterson organized a company-wide celebration to recognize not just the successful contract, but the cultural transformation that had followed. Maria was the guest of honor, though she remained characteristically modest about her contributions. "A year ago, I was cleaning this factory floor," she said during her remarks to the assembled employees. Today I'm helping to design the engines that run on it. This change happened because Mr. Peterson and all of you were willing to listen with open minds. That gives me hope for what we can accomplish together in the future." As Peterson looked around at his employees, he saw faces that reflected excitement about possibilities rather than resignation to limitations. Maria's story had become their story, a reminder that extraordinary potential often existed in ordinary places, waiting for someone wise enough to recognize it and brave enough to nurture it. The mysterious knocking that had once threatened to destroy everything had become the catalyst for transforming Peterson Manufacturing into something far better than it had ever been before. And it all started with a simple woman who knew how to listen to the voice of an engine, and a boss who finally learned to listen to the voice of his employees.